But first, the U.S. economy bounced back in the third quarter after shrinking in the first half of the year. The Bureau of Economic Analysis reported Thursday the nation's gross domestic product grew at a 2.6% annual rate from July through September. This jump in the broadest gauge of economic output reverses an annual decline of 0.6% from April through June. But elsewhere, there are signs of strain. Mortgage rates have reached their highest level in 20 years. Freddie Mac reports the average rate of a 30-year fixed mortgage is now over 7%. The last time rates climbed so high was back in April of 2002. President Biden is still celebrating the economy, and here's what he had to say earlier Thursday.
And although it may not feel like it for everyone, people's incomes went up last quarter more than inflation went up. And enough growth. So economic growth is up, the price of inflation is down, real incomes are up, and the price of gas is down.
For more on this, I want to bring in David Wessel. He's the director of the Hutchins Center on Fiscal and Monetary Policy at the Brookings Institution. David, it's very good to see you. What was behind this GDP bounce back in the last quarter?
Almost all of it was the result of very strong export performance on the part of the United States. The bulk of the increase in GDP came from the fact that we sold a lot more goods, oil included, and had a lot more visitors to the United States than we'd had the previous quarter. Domestic spending, if you just look at what American consumers and businesses spent, grew very slowly in the third quarter.
So is that why, David, there are economists who are saying there were signs of a slowdown in these numbers, that consumer spending, or is there other stuff too?
Yeah, well, absolutely. As you noted earlier, mortgage rates are up and housing has taken a big hit. There were some welcome signs of business investment being strong in equipment and in intellectual property, but business investment in structures, including office buildings, was down. I think what we saw here is exactly what the Federal Reserve is hoping for: a slowdown in domestic demand, inflation beginning to abate, but still too high. And what economists, when they put all this together, after all, the GDP report is looking in their rearview mirror. Yeah. When you put it all together, most economists expect the economy to grow in the fourth quarter, but at a very slow rate. And frankly, that's what the Fed is hoping for.
Well, I was just about to ask you about the Fed because they're meeting next week. So using that awful cliche of a soft landing, remind us again what that goal is, and would this be consistent then with what the Fed is hoping for? And if that's the case, what kinds of economic behavior or is taking place that would send the Fed the signal that its work is working?
The Fed thinks that the reason we have too much inflation in the economy is, in addition to all the COVID-related and supply chain problems that are well reported, that basically demand in the economy has grown faster than the capacity of the economy to meet that demand. They can't do much about supply, so they're trying to slow the amount of demand in the economy. And the way they do that is by raising interest rates, which makes it more expensive for people like you and me to borrow. And they hope that some of us will spend a little less and bring things into equilibrium. A soft landing is slowing the economy just enough to bring down inflation without causing a really bad recession. I think the Fed is on track for the soft landing. This is what they're hoping for. They're going to raise rates again next week by a lot, probably 0.75 percentage point, and then probably by another 0.5 percentage point at the end of the year. The risk here is that because they're so determined to break the back of inflation and not let inflation get embedded in the U.S. economy, that they'll keep raising interest rates, and that will lead to a recession next year, which frankly is what I anticipate.
So if you anticipate a recession next year, and you mentioned the housing market, explain to us why if they're headed for a soft landing, why would we have a recession? In other words, can you use, say, the housing market or some other sector of the economy that would give us a picture of what it looks like for the Fed to go too far, for things to get too expensive and to create that recessionary spiral you're talking about?
Sure. So the difference between a soft landing and a hard landing, which is a recession, is a pretty fine line. Basically, The job market has been impressively strong. Unemployment, 3.5%, hasn't been this low for decades. And the question is, can the Fed slow the economy and get unemployment up just a little bit without overdoing it? And so what I expect in the months ahead is that as borrowing gets more expensive, fewer people will buy houses. We've seen housing construction, that's what shows up in the GDP, is down quite a bit. When people buy fewer houses, that means less buying in furniture and less redecorating and all that. I expect that we'll see some slowdown in demand for cars, which usually happens when interest rates go up. It's been a little weird lately because of such pent-up demand for cars. We've seen a number of big companies, Amazon today, Facebook, saying that they see the outlook as being a little soft. I expect to see more reports of layoffs, probably some reports of companies saying they're just freezing hiring. And so the question is, can we have a gentle slowdown and a mild recession? That requires the Fed to get it just exactly right. And that's pretty hard in a world that's pretty tumultuous with global growth slowing, oil prices going up and down, and so forth.
David Wessel in Washington, one of my favorite explainers. Thank you for explaining all that for us, David. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.